Welcome to the Oracle's Rest, a place where stories unfold slowly, where time softens, and where the mind is free to wander. Tonight, we step into the blue hour of an old Japanese evening, when the sun has slipped behind the mountains and the paper lanterns are just being lit, when the rice fields fade to shadow and the shapes of things grow uncertain in the dusk. This is the hour the old people called the time of meeting, the thin moment between day and night when, they said, the other things come out. Tonight, we drift gently into the wondrous world of the yokai, the spirits and strange creatures of old Japan, the fox with many tails, the jolly shape-shifting tanuki, the little river dweller with a dish upon its head, and the soft household spirits that were thought to share the quiet corners of every home. Let us say at the outset what these yokai are and are not. For tonight, we are not telling ghost stories to frighten anyone. The yokai were not, for the most part, monsters to be feared. They were something stranger and gentler than that. They were the way an old people made sense of a world full of mystery, the shapes they gave to the unexplained, the faces they drew upon the wind and the water and the dark. A yokai might be mischievous or odd or startling, but very many of them were harmless, and some were kindly, and nearly all of them were, above everything else, wondrous. To walk through the world of the yokai is not to walk through a haunted house. It is to walk through an old and enchanted landscape where every hill and river and old forgotten thing might be quietly alive. To understand where the yokai came from, we have to understand how the old people of Japan saw the world, for it was very different from the way we are taught to see it now. To them, the world was not empty of spirit. It was full of it, brimming with it, alive in every part. In the old way of seeing, a spirit dwelt in the mountain, and a spirit dwelt in the river. There were spirits in the great old trees, in the tall waterfalls, in the strangely shaped rocks, in the wind that moved through the valley. The world was crowded with unseen presences, countless quiet powers living in the land alongside the people. And one showed them respect and left small offerings, and did not carelessly give offence. It was a world in which the boundary between the human and the more than human was thin, and in some places and at some hours thinner still, and in such a world the mysterious things that happened had to come from somewhere. When a strange sound was heard in the night woods that no one could name, it was a yokai. When a traveller on a dark road felt certain that something walked behind him and turned and found nothing there, it was a yokai. When the fish would not bite, or the tools went missing, or a person fell ill, for no reason anyone could see, or a sudden chill passed through a room, or one lost one's way on a path walked 100 times before. All of these had an author, and the author was one of the strange and hidden folk of the unseen world. The yokai were, in a sense, the explanations. They were the names the old people gave to the gaps in the known, the shapes they drew around the things they could not otherwise account for, where we might now say the wind, or a trick of the mind, or simple chance. The old people said the name of a spirit, and in doing so, they turned a frightening emptiness into a story. And a story is a thing the human heart can live alongside. This is perhaps the first and deepest truth of what the yokai really were. They were a way of befriending the dark, to give a name and a face and a story to the unknown is to make it a neighbor rather than a terror. The creaking of the old house at night is far less frightening when it is only the little spirit of the house settling in for the evening. The mysterious ways of the fox, glimpsed at the wood's edge at dusk, become a wonder rather than a dread. When the fox is understood to be a clever and magical being with a life of its own, the yokai peopled the darkness with characters, and a darkness full of characters is a gentler place than a darkness that is simply empty and unknown. Let us meet some of them now, and let us begin with the most beloved and magical of all, the fox, the kitsune. In the old tales of Japan, the fox is no ordinary animal. It is a creature of deep magic and long life and great intelligence. And the older a fox grows, the more powerful and the wiser it becomes. The oldest and greatest of the foxes were said to live for hundreds of years. And as a fox aged and gained in power, it grew new tails, one after another, so that you could read the age and the might of a fox in the number of tails it carried. The very greatest of them, the ancient and venerable foxes, were said to possess 9 tails, and to have grown so wise and so powerful over their centuries of life that they were almost divine. The kitsune could do a remarkable thing. It could change its shape. A fox of sufficient age and power could take on the form of a human being, most often appearing as a beautiful woman, and walk among people unrecognized, its true nature hidden behind a human face. There are countless old stories of such foxes, some of them mischievous, playing tricks upon the proud and the foolish, and some of them tender. Tales of a fox who took human form and married a kind man and lived with him in love for years, keeping her secret, until at last some small thing gave her away, and she was forced to return to the wild. These are not horror stories. Many of them are among the most touching and beautiful tales in all of Japanese folklore. Stories of love across the boundary between the human and the animal world, wistful and gentle and sad. And the fox was not only a trickster and a shapeshifter, it was also sacred. The fox was understood to be the messenger of one of the great and beloved spirits of Japan, the spirit of rice and harvest and prosperity, the guardian of the fields that fed the people at the shrines dedicated to this spirit. All across the land, you will find pairs of stone foxes standing guard, sitting neatly on their haunches at the gate, sometimes with a red cloth tied about their necks, watching over the sacred place. To the farmers, the fox was a friend and a protector, a guardian of the rice. That was life itself, and its magic was not a thing to fear, but a blessing. Upon the harvest, even the mysterious lights sometimes seen flickering across the fields and hills on dark nights, pale and drifting and cold, were called the foxfire, the lanterns of the foxes, and to see them was to glimpse the quiet magic moving through the night. Now let us turn to a merrier spirit altogether, the fox's good-natured cousin in the world of shapeshifters, the tanuki. The tanuki is a real animal, a small woodland creature, something like a stout, round, furry dog with the markings of a raccoon that truly lives in the forests of Japan. But in the old tales, the tanuki, like the fox, was a magical shapeshifter, and where the fox was clever and sometimes sly, the tanuki was jolly, round-bellied, foolish, and endlessly good-humoured. The tanuki of folklore is a lover of good food and good drink and good fun, a merry trickster whose pranks are almost always harmless, a bringer of cheer and good fortune wherever it goes. The tricks of the tanuki are the stuff of comedy, not fright. It was said to be able to change its shape as the fox could, and it delighted in playful transformations, turning itself into everyday objects, or turning leaves into what looked like money to pay for its food and drink, cheerfully cheating the innkeeper who would find, in the morning, only a handful of leaves where the coins had been. There is an old and much loved tale of a tanuki who transformed itself into a tea kettle to repay a kindness, and could not quite hold the shape, so that the kettle sprouted a furry head and legs at the most inconvenient moments, to the astonishment of everyone. These are gentle, funny stories, and the tanuki is a gentle, funny spirit. And to this day, you will find cheerful, pot-bellied statues of him standing outside restaurants and inns all across Japan, welcoming guests with a broad smile, a symbol of good cheer and good luck, and a full and happy belly. And now let us go down to the water, to the rivers and the ponds and the still green pools, for there dwells one of the most curious of all the yokai, the kappa. The kappa was a water spirit, small, about the size of a child, with greenish skin and webbed hands, and feet good for swimming, and a shell upon its back, like a turtle, and a face, something like a beak. But the strangest and most important thing about the kappa was the dish it carried upon the top of its head, a shallow hollow that held a little water, for in that water lay all the kappa's strength and life, as long as the dish stayed full and wet. The kappa was powerful in its watery home, But if the water spilled and the dish ran dry, the kappa grew weak and helpless. And so the whole of the kappa's power rested in that fragile little bowl of water balanced upon its head. The kappa was a mischievous creature, fond of pranks, and the old stories tell of it lurking in the rivers, playing tricks on those who came to the water's edge. But there was a kindly purpose folded inside these tales, for the kappa stories were also a way of teaching children to respect the water and to be careful near the deep and dangerous pools. In this way, the mischief of the kappa served a gentle end, keeping the little ones from wandering carelessly into the river. And the kappa had its courtly side as well. It was said to be, of all things, exceedingly polite, deeply devoted to good manners, so that if you met a kappa and bowed to it politely, the kappa, being unable to resist returning a bow, would bow back to you, and in bowing would tip its head and spill the precious water from the dish, and so lose its power. All through its own good manners, there is something wonderfully gentle and funny in that. A monster undone not by a sword, but by courtesy. The kappa had its likes, and its knowledge, too. It was said to love cucumbers above all foods, so that people would write their family names upon cucumbers and float them down the river as an offering to keep the kappa friendly and content. And in some tales, the kappa was not merely a prankster, but a keeper of wisdom, said to have taught people the arts of healing and the setting of bones, or the ways of channeling water to the fields, sharing the secret knowledge of the rivers with those who treated it with kindness. So even the strange green creature of the water pools, when you come to know it, turns out to be less a monster than a neighbour, mischievous and mannerly and wise, keeping its watch over the quiet green places where the water lies still. But of all the yokai, perhaps the gentlest and the dearest were the spirits of the household, the small, quiet presences that were thought to share the home. For in the old way of seeing, a house was not merely walls and beams and paper screens. It was a living place full of small spirits, each with its own quiet corner and its own quiet care. There was thought to be a spirit of the hearth where the fire was kept and the food was cooked, watching over the warmth at the heart of the home. There were spirits of the kitchen and the well and the doorway and the storehouse, small guardians of the ordinary places, keeping their watch over the daily life of the family. To live in an old Japanese house was to live surrounded quietly by a whole small company of unseen housemates, and a wise family kept the house clean and swept and cared for, partly out of respect for these gentle spirits who shared it. The dearest of all these household spirits was a little being who took the form of a child. It was said that some fortunate old houses were home to the spirit of a small child who lived unseen in the quiet rooms and who could sometimes be heard in the night, the soft patter of little feet in an empty corridor, a faint laugh from a room where no child was. This spirit was not a thing to fear at all. Quite the opposite. It was the greatest of good fortune to have such a spirit dwelling in your house. For it was said that so long as the little house child stayed, the family would prosper, the household would flourish, and good luck would remain. And it was said, too, that if ever the little spirit grew unhappy and departed, the fortunes of the house would quietly decline. And so the family cherished their unseen child, left small treats out for it, and delighted in the little sounds of its play, and counted themselves blessed to share their home with so gentle a guest. There was even a whole tribe of yokai made not of animals or of nature, but of ordinary objects, and these are among the most charming of all. The old people believed that a tool or an object, if it were used faithfully, for a very long time, for 100 years or more, might at last awaken and gain a spirit and come alive. An old umbrella, long used and then forgotten in a corner, might wake one night and hop about on a single leg, with one great eye and a long tongue, a comical and harmless little creature. An old paper lantern might split its paper into a wide, laughing mouth and gaze about with a single eye. A worn pair of sandals, an old tea kettle, a forgotten musical instrument, a discarded prayer bead, any long-loved thing might, in the fullness of years, quietly come to life and join the ranks of the yokai. These awakened objects were rarely dangerous. They were mostly whimsical, a little sad, a little funny, the spirits of things that had served long and been cast aside, and their tales carried a quiet lesson, too, about caring for one's belongings and not wasting or discarding what had served one faithfully. Imagine such a thing, an old house at night, and all its long-used objects softly stirring, the old umbrella hopping in the corner, the paper lantern blinking its single eye, the tea kettle sprouting a furry tail. It is not a frightening picture at all. It is a strange and gentle and slightly comic one. A whole household of ordinary things quietly waking in the dark, and it captures something lovely about the world of the yokai, which is that it found the marvelous hiding inside the ordinary and gave a secret nighttime life to the most everyday and humble things. And there were the yokai of the road and the night, the ones a traveller might meet on a lonely path in the dark. And even these, the ones that sound most alarming, were often strangely harmless, more puzzling than dangerous. There was said to be a spirit that took the form of a wall, an invisible barrier that would rise up before a traveller walking at night and block the way, so that no matter which way he turned, he could not get past and could go no further until he waited or sat down, or in some tellings tapped low along the ground to make it disappear. This was simply the old explanation for that strange feeling of being unaccountably lost or blocked on a familiar road in the dark, and the spirit behind it meant no real harm. There was another gentle presence that would follow a traveller along the road at night, an unseen thing whose footsteps could be heard padding softly along just behind, keeping pace, never catching up, never seen. It sounds eerie, and yet the old wisdom for dealing with it was the gentlest thing imaginable. You had only to step to the side of the road and say politely, "Please, go on ahead," and the footsteps would cease, and the unseen follower, satisfied, would trouble you no more. There was a spirit by the river banks whose only doing was to make, in the night, the soft and endless sound of someone washing beans in the water, a quiet, rhythmic rustling by the dark stream, harmless and strange, all up and down the old roads and rivers of Japan. The night was full of these small mysteries, these gentle, puzzling presences, and the old people, far from cowering before them, had learned to live alongside them with a kind of easy familiarity. A bow here, a polite word there, a cucumber floated on the stream. Let us climb now from the villages and the rivers up into the high country, into the deep forests and the misted mountains. For the mountains had their own great spirits, and among the most awesome of all the yokai were the guardians of the peaks, the tengu. The tengu were spirits of the high forests and the mountain tops, powerful and proud. And in the oldest imaginings they were something like great birds with feathers and wings and sharp beaks, while in later tellings they took on a more human form, red of face, with a long and prominent nose, dressed in the robes of a mountain hermit. They were beings of great strength and skill, said to be unmatched masters of swordsmanship and of the martial arts. And there were old tales of heroes who wandered into the deep mountains and were taught secret arts by the tengu who dwelt there. The tengu were not gentle in the way the household spirits were gentle, but neither were they simple monsters. They were guardians, keepers of the sacred mountains and the deep forests, and they were closely bound in the old imagination with the wandering holy men who sought enlightenment in the high and lonely places, the ascetics who walked the mountain paths and meditated beneath the waterfalls. The tengu were thought to watch over these wild, sacred places, to punish the arrogant and the disrespectful who came into the mountains without proper humility, but also sometimes to reward and to teach those who came with a pure and humble heart. And the strange sounds of the deep mountains were laid at the tengu's door as well. The far-off boom in the night forest, like a great tree crashing down where no fallen tree could afterward be found, was called the tengu's felling. The distant roll of what sounded like drums echoing among the peaks, with no village near enough to make it, was the tengu's drumming. To walk into the deep mountains in the old belief was to walk into the tengu's domain and to feel in the great silence of the high forest, in the wind moving through the ancient trees, in the unaccountable sounds that drifted down from the heights, the presence of the proud old spirits keeping their watch over the peaks, and where there was water, great water, the deep lakes and the wide rivers and the sea itself, there dwelt the greatest of the water spirits, the dragons. The dragon of the Old East was not the fire-breathing terror of Western story. It was a serpent of the water, long and sinuous and wise, a bringer of rain and a lord of the rivers and the seas. And it was, on the whole, a benevolent and a holy being. The dragons were thought to dwell in the deep places of the water, in the great lakes and the deep pools, and the palaces beneath the waves, and to hold power over the rain and the tides in a land of rice, where the harvest depended upon the rain's coming at the proper season. The dragon who brought the rain was a spirit of the highest importance, prayed to in times of drought, honored as a giver of the water. That was life. There were old tales of the dragon king of the sea, who dwelt in a shining palace far beneath the waves, in a realm where time ran strangely, and a visitor might pass what seemed a few days only, to return and find that long years had gone by. In the world above, the dragon was awe and wonder more than fear. The vast, wise old spirit of the deep waters, coiling through the rain clouds, sleeping in the still green depths of the mountain lakes, and in the winter, when the snow came down over the northern lands and the world went white and silent and bitterly cold, there walked one of the most hauntingly beautiful of all the spirits, the snow woman. She appeared. The old stories said, on nights of deep snow, a tall and pale and lovely figure moving through the storm, dressed all in white, her skin white as the snow itself, appearing to travellers lost in the blizzard. She was, in truth, a spirit of the winter itself, the beauty and the deadly cold of the snow given a human shape, and her stories carried the old and sober knowledge that the winter storm was a beautiful and a dangerous thing, that to be caught out in the deep snow was, to meet a cold that could be fatal. Yet even she was not simply a terror. In some of the gentlest and most famous of her tales, she spares a young man lost in the storm, moved by his youth, and later comes to him in another form and lives with him in love for many years. A story tender and wistful, and touched with the same sad magic as the tales of the fox wife. The snow woman is the winter's own spirit, beautiful and remote and cold, drifting through the falling snow. And to picture her is to feel the strange, hushed beauty of a world buried deep in white. It is worth pausing to understand why the twilight and certain places mattered so much in all of this. For the yokai did not appear just anywhere or at any time. They belonged, above all, to the in-between, that blue hour where we began, the dusk, the thin moment when the day has ended, but the night has not quite come, was held to be the very time when the boundary between the human world and the other world grew thin and porous, when the two worlds brushed against each other, and the strange folk could cross over. It was a threshold in time, neither day nor night. And thresholds were where the yokai lived. And just as certain hours were thresholds, so too were certain places. The bridge that crossed from one bank to the other, the crossroads where the paths met and parted, the mountain pass between one valley and the next, the gateway, the doorway, the boundary stone at the village edge, the mouth of the tunnel, the still surface of the water that divided the air from the depths. All of these were in-between places, neither one thing nor the other, and all of them were held to be places where the veil grew thin, and a traveller might meet the marvellous. The old world was mapped in this way, not only by its roads and its rivers, but by its thresholds, its thin places, where at the thin hours one stepped a little closer to the world of the spirits. The spirits turned, too, with the seasons, for the enchanted world was not the same in every part of the year, and each season had its own wonders. In the spring, when the mountains woke from the winter and the cherry trees broke into clouds of pale blossom, there was an old sense that the blossoming trees themselves held a gentle spirit, that the brief and lovely flowering was itself a kind of visitation, a spirit come into the tree for its short bright season, and the people gathered beneath the blossoms partly in quiet honor of it, in the deep of summer, on the warm, dark nights, when the fireflies drifted green and glowing over the water. The rivers were the kappa's own, and the still pools felt most alive with hidden presents. And in the heat of the year, it was the custom to gather and tell the old strange tales, letting a pleasant shiver of wonder cool the summer night. In summer, too, small lanterns were set adrift upon the rivers and the sea, floating away in a soft procession of light, carrying the people's thoughts out toward the spirits of those who had gone before. Then came the autumn, the season of the harvest, when the rice stood golden in the fields, and the fox, the guardian of the grain, was closest and most honored, and the pale foxfire was most often seen flickering across the gathered fields on the cool, clear nights. This was the season of the great round harvest moon, when people would sit out to watch the moon rise huge and golden over the hills, and set out offerings to it, and feel the deep, quiet turning of the year. And then the autumn deepened into winter, and the snows came, and the snow woman walked the blizzards, and the family drew close about the hearth where the fire spirit kept its watch, and the long, dark nights were filled once more with the telling of the tales, while outside the snow fell silent and deep over the sleeping land. Around and around the year turned, and the spirits turned with it. Blossom spirit and firefly and river sprite and harvest fox and moon and snow. A whole turning wheel of gentle wonders marking the slow procession of the seasons. There is a wonderful old image that gathers all of these together, an image the old artists loved to paint upon their long scrolls. It was called the Night Parade, the great procession of the Yokai, and it was said that on certain nights all the strange folk of the unseen world would come out together and march in a long, winding parade through the darkened streets, a pageant of 100 spirits. Down the empty midnight lanes they would come, the foxes and the tanuki, their animate umbrellas and lanterns, the river dwellers and the mountain spirits, the awakened tea kettles and the long-necked wonders, all of them processing together through the dark in a great strange festival of the night while the human world lay sleeping behind closed doors. It was said that a person who chanced to be out in the streets on such a night and saw the parade passing would do well to hide, to slip into a doorway and let the strange procession go by unremarked, for the parade belonged to the spirits and not to people, and a mortal was not meant to look upon it. Yet even here the old belief offered a gentle protection, for it was said that a sacred charm carried close, a holy word written on a scrap of paper and tucked into the sleeve, would keep a person safe, even in the very midst of the passing spirits, so that one might stand quiet and unharmed while the whole marvelous host streamed by. To picture the night parade is to see the whole world of the yokai at once, spilling merry and strange and wondrous through the sleeping town, a secret carnival of the marvelous unfolding in the dark hours when no one was meant to be watching. Let us come back to the fox for a moment, the kitsune, for there is more magic in the old folklore than we have yet touched, and it is some of the loveliest of all. You may know that gentle strangeness of weather when the rain falls softly while the sun is still shining, the bright, warm rain of a clear day, when the drops come glittering down out of a blue and sunlit sky. In old Japan, there was a beautiful name for this. They called it the fox's wedding. It was said that when the sun shone and the rain fell together, somewhere in the hills, a procession of foxes was making its way to a wedding, and the strange bright rain was the sign of it. And on certain dark nights, when a line of pale, mysterious lights was seen moving in single file along a distant hillside, the drifting foxfire strung out across the dark. That too was called a fox's wedding, the lantern-lit bridal procession of the foxes winding through the night. And so wondrous in this, in a people who looked at a sun shower or a line of far-off lights and saw not a mystery, to fear but a wedding, to smile at a quiet marvel unfolding just out of sight in the folds of the hills, and the fox's sacred places were among the most beautiful in all the land. At the great shrines to the harvest spirit, whose messengers the foxes were, long avenues of vermilion gateways stood one behind another, hundreds and thousands of them, marching up the wooded hillsides in winding tunnels of soft red light. And everywhere among them sat the stone foxes, keeping their watch, some with a key or a jewel or a scroll held in the mouth, to walk those quiet tunnels of red gates as the evening came on. The stone foxes watching from the shadows was to feel oneself passing gently out of the ordinary world and into the edge of the world of the spirits. The night, in the old belief, was full of small, harmless wonders, and some of them were the very stuff of sleep itself. There was said to be a little spirit whose only mischief was to slip into the bedroom of a sleeping person and quietly turn their pillow so that a sleeper might wake. In the morning, with the pillow shifted from where it had been, turned about in the night by unseen hands. It was a strange thing to find, and yet a gentle one, and it belonged to the soft, mysterious world of sleep, where things shift and turn in the dark, and no one can quite say how. There were other small night spirits of this harmless kind, presences that made a sound, or moved a thing, or left a trace, and did no more. The gentle furniture of a world in which the night was never quite empty, never quite still, always faintly astir with quiet, unseen life. Not all the spirits were gentle, of course, and it would not be honest to pretend so. There were the Oni, the great horned ogres of the old tales, huge and strong, with wild hair and fierce faces, red or blue of skin, carrying heavy iron clubs. These were the fearsome ones, the closest thing in the old imagination to true monsters. And yet, even the Oni were not only terrors. There is an old and cheerful festival, still kept each year as winter turns towards spring, in which the people drive the Oni out of their houses for good luck, casting handfuls of roasted beans out the door and through the rooms, while calling out for the demons to go and good fortune to come in. It is a merry thing, this festival, full of laughter, children flinging beans about the house, and it turns even the dreaded Oni into a kind of game, a bit of seasonal fun, a way of sweeping out the old year's misfortune and welcoming the new, and some oni in the old belief were not wicked at all, but guardians, their fierce horned faces set upon the roof tiles of houses and temples to frighten away evil, so that the very fearsomeness of the oni was turned to the protection of the home. Even the monsters, in the end, were put to gentle use. Let us think now about where all of this came from and how it grew, for the world of the yokai was not made all at once, but built up slowly over many centuries, layer upon layer. In the earliest times, the yokai were close to the old spirits of the land, the powers of the mountains and the rivers, fearsome and holy, treated with awe. As the centuries passed and villages grew and stories travelled and mingled, the yokai multiplied and softened and took on ever more particular shapes and personalities. Buddhist ideas arriving from the mainland brought their own spirits and demons and mingled them with the old spirits of the land. Wandering storytellers carried tales from village to village, and each place added its own local wonders. The particular spirit of this river, the strange creature said to haunt that mountain pass, so that the land became a vast patchwork of local marvels, each region with its own yokai and its own tales. And then, some centuries ago, in a long age of peace, when the great cities of Japan grew rich and lively and full of people hungry for entertainment, the yokai enjoyed a wonderful flowering. In this age, the yokai became not only creatures of village belief, but characters of art and story and play. Artists made beautiful illustrated books that gathered the yokai together and gave them forms, cataloguing the spirits like a naturalist cataloguing birds and beasts, drawing each one with its name and its nature, so that people could delight in them. Some of these artists so loved their work that they invented new yokai of their own, dreaming up fresh spirits and slipping them in among the old, so that the boundary between ancient belief and playful invention grew happily blurred. The yokai appeared in popular tales and picture books, in games and plays and festivals. They became in a sense, beloved characters, a shared cast of wonders that everyone knew, delighted in as much as they were ever feared. And when, in time, the modern world came on with its bright electric lights that pushed back the dark, and its machines, and its new ways of explaining the strange sounds and the lost paths, the yokai did not simply vanish, as one might have expected the old superstitions to do. Instead, they were gathered up and treasured. About 100 years ago, a thoughtful scholar travelled into the remote countryside of the north and sat with the old country people and listened carefully to the tales they still told, the stories of the little house child who brought fortune to the home, of the water sprites in the rivers, of the mountain folk and the strange lights, and the spirits of the fields. He wrote these tales down faithfully, just as they were told, and in doing so, he saved a whole world of vanishing wonder and helped found the loving study of the old folklore, so that the yokai passed from living belief into cherished heritage without ever being lost. And later still, in more recent times, a beloved artist gave much of his long life to the yokai, drawing them lovingly in popular picture stories that children read by the millions, bringing the old spirits back into the daily imagination of a new age, so that a child who had never feared a fox or a kappa in earnest might still know all their names and faces and delight in them. Today, the yokai are more beloved than ever. They fill books and films and animations and games. Towns hold festivals in honor of their local spirits, and one seaside town has a whole street lined with little bronze statues of the yokai, where visitors come from everywhere to walk among the friendly spirits in the open air. The old company of wonders has found a new life in the modern world, no longer quite believed in, perhaps, but loved, which may be a deeper and a warmer thing than fear ever was. It is worth marveling, too, at the sheer abundance of them. For the yokai are not a handful of famous figures, but a vast and teeming multitude. Over the long centuries, the people named and drew and told of hundreds upon hundreds of different spirits, a whole sprawling bestiary of the marvelous, one for nearly every strange sound and odd sight and unaccountable feeling a person might meet. There was a spirit for the sound of a tree that seemed to fall in the night forest, though no tree was found. Down in the morning, there was a spirit for the mysterious rustling in the reeds, and one for the sudden, inexplicable chill, and one for the feeling of being watched, and one for the little grain of grit that always seemed to find its way into the corner of the eye. The old imagination reached into every crevice of daily life and found or made a spirit there until the whole world was catalogued and named and peopled, every mystery given its keeper, every odd corner of experience given its small presiding wonder. And this impulse to name and to catalogue every spirit was itself a kind of taming, a way of mapping the whole territory of the mysterious so that nothing in it need remain nameless, and therefore truly frightening. A named wonder is a wonder one can live beside. And in this, we can see the yokai completing the journey. They had always been quietly making, from terror to wonder to delight, what began as the frightening unknown, the nameless things in the dark, became, over the long centuries, a rich and beloved and half-comic company of spirits, a national treasury of the imagination, the very same fox that a frightened traveller might once have. Dreaded became the charming heroine of a love story. The strange creature in the river became a mischievous, mannerly, cucumber-loving friend. The nameless dread of the dark road became a polite, invisible follower whom one need only address courteously to send away. The yokai grew gentler as the people grew more at home in their world, and in their gentling we can read the whole long story of a people slowly befriending their own night. Consider, too, the spirits of the great old trees, for these were among the most quietly revered of all. In the old belief, an ancient tree, one that had stood for many hundreds of years, growing slowly through the generations, while the people came and went beneath it, might hold within it a spirit of its own, a tree spirit dwelling in the old wood. It was thought that the strange echo one hears in the mountains, the voice that answers back across the valley when one calls out among the peaks was the voice of these tree spirits replying, the mountains themselves speaking back, the very greatest and oldest of the sacred trees were honored openly. A thick rope of woven straw was tied about the trunk to mark it as a dwelling of a spirit, a sign that here was something holy, not to be cut or harmed, and people would pause before such a tree and bow and feel the deep, quiet presence of the old life within it. To stand before a vast and ancient tree, its great trunk wrapped in the sacred rope, its branches spreading wide and dark overhead, was to feel oneself in the presence of a patient and enormous being, a spirit far older than any person, keeping its slow green watch over the passing lives of the village. Let us tell one of the old tales slowly, so you may feel the shape of them, for the tales themselves are the truest window into the world of the yokai. There was once, the story goes, a kind and lonely man who lived at the edge of the fields and who one day showed a small mercy to a fox in trouble and let it go free. Not long after, on an evening of soft rain, a beautiful woman appeared at his door, seeking shelter from the weather, and he took her in and gave her food and warmth, and in time they came to love one another and were married and lived together in great happiness. A child was born to them, and the little house at the edge of the fields was full of warmth and laughter, and the years passed gently by. The woman was a wonderful wife, gentle and wise and kind, and the man never thought to ask where she had come from on that rainy night, and never guessed her secret, for she was, of course, the fox he had once set free, come in human form to repay his kindness with a life of love. But such things in the old tales cannot last forever. One day, some small thing gave her away, a shadow that fell wrong, a moment when she was seen unguarded, and her true nature was revealed, and by the old rules of such magic, once her secret was known, she could no longer stay. She had to return to the wild, to the world of the foxes, and leave behind the husband and the child she loved. The parting was full of sorrow and gentle, and she did not simply vanish, but lingered to say her farewells, and left behind, in some tellings, a tender poem telling her family that if ever they missed her, they might come and find her out among the fields and the hills. And though she was gone from the house, it was said she did not truly abandon them, but watched over them still from the edge of the wild, and came back sometimes, unseen, to look upon her sleeping child. It is a sad tale and a beautiful one, and there is not a shred of horror in it, only love and loss and the tender strangeness of a world in which such things were thought to be possible. And in tales like this, we can begin to see what the yokai truly gave the people who told them, for the stories were never only entertainment. They were vessels of wisdom, quietly teaching what a people needed to know. The tale of the water sprite kept the children back from the dangerous river. The tale of the spirits in the old trees taught reverence for the ancient forest and stayed the careless axe. The tale of the objects that woke after long years of use taught people to cherish their belongings and not to waste or heedlessly discard what had served them faithfully. For in the old feeling there was a real sorrow in waste, a sense that a thing long used deserved respect. The tales of the mountain spirits taught humility before the wild high places, and running through all of them was the deep old lesson of the whole enchanted world view, that the world is not ours alone, that it is shared with countless other lives and presences, seen and unseen, and that to move through it well is to move through it with respect, with courtesy, with a bow at the threshold, and a kind word for the unseen, and a careful, grateful tending of the world one has been lent. The yokai were, among all their other roles, the teachers of this gentle wisdom, and they taught it not with rules and commandments, but with wonder, with stories, with the soft enchantment of a living world. And this brings us to the deepest answer to our question, what the yokai really were. They were the imagination of a people at play upon the surface of the mysterious. They were the shapes drawn to fill the empty spaces of the unknown, the characters given to the dark, so that the dark might become a story. They were explanations, yes, for the strange sounds and the lost paths, and the sudden chills. But they were more than explanations. They were companions. They peopled the lonely places, the mountain and the river, and the midnight road and the quiet corners of the old house, and turned a world that might have felt empty and frightening into a world that was crowded, instead, with character and wonder and quiet life. To believe in the yokai was to live in an enchanted world, a world where nothing was merely dead matter, where the old umbrella and the mountain pass, and the flickering light on the far hillside all had a story and a secret life. Perhaps that is why the yokai have never truly faded, why they are beloved in Japan to this day, painted and drawn and told of and delighted in as much as ever. For there is something in the human heart that longs for exactly this, for a world that is alive and full of meaning, a world where the mysterious is not a void, but a presence, where the dark is populated by wonders rather than emptied of them. The yokai offered that world, and they offer it still, an enchantment laid gently over the ordinary, a way of seeing in which every hill might hold a spirit, and every old and humble thing might quietly wake in the night. And let us tell one more tale, a merrier one, to balance the sadness of the fox wife. For the tanuki's stories are as full of laughter as the foxes are full of longing. There was once a poor man who showed kindness to a tanuki, and the grateful creature, wishing to repay him, turned itself into a fine tea kettle for the man to sell, promising to help him prosper. The man sold the handsome kettle to a temple where the monks were delighted with it and set it on the fire to boil water for their tea. But the moment the kettle grew hot, the poor tanuki could not bear it and lost its grip upon the shape, so that all at once the tea kettle sprouted a furry head and 4 little legs and a bushy tail, and went scampering about the temple, to the astonishment of the monks, half kettle and half tanuki, dashing this way and that, while the startled monks gave chase. The kettle creature escaped and returned to the poor man, and the two became fast friends. And the clever tanuki, still able to balance in its kettle shape, performed wonderful tricks, walking a tightrope as a tea kettle to the delight of crowds, until the man grew prosperous and comfortable at last, and the tanuki lived out its days beside him in ease and friendship. It is a silly, warm, good-hearted tale, the very soul of the tanuki, and it is easy to see why such a spirit was loved. Think now of how it felt to live in this enchanted world, in the daily round of an old Japanese home and village. It was a life woven through with small, quiet gestures of respect toward the unseen. A little offering of rice or water might be set out for the spirits of the house. A traveller setting off on a journey might pause at the wayside shrine at the edge of the village and bow and clap and ask the local spirits for a safe road. The first fruits of the harvest might be offered up in thanks before any were eaten. A high shelf in the home might hold a tiny shrine where the household spirits were honored each day. None of this was done in fear. It was done the way one keeps a friendship with small daily courtesies, a bow here and a word of thanks there, a tending of the bond between the seen world and the unseen. To live so was to feel oneself always in company, never truly alone, held within a web of quiet relationships that stretched out from the human hearth into the mountains and the rivers and the whole living land. And at night, when the work was done and the family gathered close around the fire and the wind moved in the trees outside and the old house creaked and settled in the dark, the stories were told. The grandparents told them the old tales of the fox and the tanuki and the water sprite, of the snow woman drifting through the blizzard and the spirits stirring in the ancient trees. And the children listened, wide-eyed by the firelight, while the darkness pressed soft against the paper screens, and the strange sounds of the night, the creak and the rustle and the far-off cry, were not terrors then, but parts of the story. The quiet stirrings of the gentle unseen company that shared the dark. In this way, the fear of the night was turned, generation after generation, into wonder, and the children grew up in a world that was mysterious but not menacing, strange but not empty, a world in which they were never quite alone and never far from a marvel. And notice, in all of this, How gentle were the ways the people used to get along with the spirits, for they did not, on the whole, make war upon the yokai. They lived alongside them, as one lives alongside neighbors who are sometimes difficult, with courtesy and small precautions, and a great deal of good manners. A pinch of salt scattered at the doorway, a paper charm brought home from the shrine and pinned above the door, a bow at the wayside stone, a polite word spoken to the unseen follower. On the road, a cucumber floated down the river for the kappa, a sacred rope tied about the old tree, a little dish of offering set out in the evening. These were the tools people used, not swords and fire, but salt and paper and courtesy and small kindnesses, the same gentle arts one might use to keep peace with any neighbor. And this tells us something true and lovely about the whole spirit of the thing that the old people did not, in the main, live in terror of their spirit world. They lived in negotiation with it, in a kind of long, easy neighborliness, giving it its due and its respect, and expecting, in return, to be mostly left in peace. The unseen world was not an enemy to be fought, but a company to be lived among gently with good manners across a whole long lifetime and a whole long history. There is one moral tale worth telling here, gentle and strange and touched with the deep magic of time, and it carries us back to the dragon of the sea. There was once a young fisherman who, walking along the shore, came upon some children tormenting a small turtle, and out of kindness he saved it and set it gently back into the waves. Some days later, as he sat in his boat upon the calm sea, a great turtle rose beside him and spoke, and told him that the little turtle he had saved was a creature of the sea dragon's palace, and that the dragon princess wished to thank him. The turtle bore him down through the green water, down and down to a shining palace on the sea floor, a place of coral and pearl and soft glowing light, where the beautiful princess of the sea welcomed him with great honor. There he stayed, in delight and ease, feasting and wandering the wondrous halls, and the days passed sweetly, and it seemed to him he had been there only a short and happy but in time he grew homesick and longed to see his village and his aging parents once more. And the princess, though sorrowful, let him go and gave him a small box as a parting gift, telling him gently that he must keep it always, but must never, ever open it. The turtle bore him back up to the sunlight and the shore, and he stepped onto the beach of his own village and found it strangely changed. The houses were not as he remembered. The faces were all unknown. And when he asked after his family, the villagers shook their heads, for the names he spoke were names from long ago, from a story their grandparents' grandparents had told of a young fisherman who had rowed out one day and never come back 300 years before. For time had run differently in the palace beneath the sea, and the few sweet days he had spent there had been 3 long centuries in the world above, and everyone he had ever known was gone. It is a tale of wonder edged with sorrow, and it lingers in the mind. This image of the young man standing lost upon the shore of his own transformed village, holding the little box. All his own time slipped away beneath the sea while he feasted in the dragon's palace, unknowing. Think, too, of the pale lights of the old nights, for these were among the loveliest of all the wonders and the gentlest. On certain dark evenings, out over the marshes, or drifting above the fields, or floating among the trees of the graveyard on the hill, people would see soft, pale flames, small drifting lights, blue, white, and cold and silent, hovering and wandering in the dark, with no lantern and no hand to carry them. To the old imagination, these drifting lights were full of meaning and wonder. Some were the foxfire, the lanterns of the foxes at their weddings. Some were held to be gentle, drifting spirits, soft souls of light wandering the night. Whatever their name, they were a quiet marvel, these pale lights floating in the darkness, over the still water and the sleeping fields, and to see one drift silently across a marsh at midnight was to feel the whole soft mystery of the old enchanted world gathered into a single wandering flame. There was fear in it, perhaps, but more than fear there was wonder, the deep old wonder of a world in which the very darkness could bloom here and there into quiet, drifting light. And in the end, that is the feeling the whole world of the yokai leaves us with, a feeling less of fear than of wonder, a sense of a world brimming softly with hidden life. It is a good feeling to carry down towards sleep, this sense of a gentle, populated, enchanted dark, a night that is not empty, and cold but full of quiet company, and soft, strange marvels. The fox at the wood's edge, and the light on the marsh, and the small spirits keeping their watch in the corners of the old house. It is the oldest and kindest of comforts, this feeling that we are not alone in the dark, that the night is peopled with quiet and gentle company, watching over us as we drift towards sleep. Let us return at the last to that blue hour where we began, the time of meeting, the thin, soft moment between the day and the night. Picture it once more. The sun has gone down behind the mountains. The last light drains from the sky, and the rice fields fade into shadow, and the shapes of the world grow soft and uncertain in the dusk. The first lanterns are lit in the village, small, warm points of light in the gathering dark, and out across the darkening land. In the old belief, the other world stirs and wakes. The foxes slip out along the wood's edge, their foxfire beginning to flicker pale across the hills. The tanuki drums softly on its round belly somewhere in the trees. Down at the river, something small and green settles into the still green pool, and in the old house, as the family gathers by the hearth, the small spirits of the home settle too into their quiet corners, the little house child pattering softly down an empty hall, and all the long-used objects waiting in the dark for the deep of night when they might stir and wake. It is a gentle world, this old enchanted world of the yokai, and a wondrous one, and there is nothing in it tonight to fear. It is only the old dark made friendly, the night filled with quiet company, the mystery of the world given 100 gentle faces. So let us rest here in the blue hour as the lanterns glow and the mountains fade, and the whole strange, wondrous company of the night settles softly into the dark around us. Rest now and let the mind drift out into that old enchanted evening, down the darkening lanes where the night parade winds slowly, through the sleeping town, along the wood's edge where the pale foxfire flickers, beside the still green pool, into the quiet old house where the small spirits keep their watch. Let the day fade the way the light fades behind the mountains. Let the shapes grow soft. Let the lanterns burn low. The blue hour deepening, the foxfire drifting, the soft feet in the empty hall, the gentle spirits of the dark, the old enchanted night. Rest now, drift, sleep.